Hey guys, it always feels so awkward, like right when a Facebook Live starts, because you're kind of talking to yourself and you're waiting to see who's going to tune in. And it's just a little nerve wracking because you don't get to see the reaction of the other people that are looking back at you. It's not like doing like a webcam video call, it's just a little bit awkward right at the beginning, but I'm going to get right into it. Today's Facebook Live is answering your guys' questions. So yesterday I posted in the group asking for some questions for what you guys wanted me to talk about tonight. That usually happens when I'm not 100% like really into a specific topic or feeling crazy passionate about sharing one particular thing with you guys. So thank you so much for there were so many questions yesterday. So I picked my favorites and ones that I could address pretty quickly. And I hope that I have some good answers for you. If you have anything like really important or comments or questions you want to make, you can always put them in the comments and I'll be able to see them. So I'm going to start with the first question is, sticking to your macros when you're hungry versus not hungry. So one thing that I would give as a piece of advice for this is that's just the name of the game when you're tracking your nutrition. Sometimes you're feeling hungry because you're actually hungry. Sometimes you're bored. Sometimes it's just because you've just started tracking your macros and you're thinking about it all the time, like thinking about what am I going to eat for dinner? How do I make 12 grams of protein and 8 grams of carbs work? And you have to take the time to figure out what you're going to eat before you eat it, and that increases your hunger. Maybe you did a really hard workout. Maybe you just don't have as much appetite. Maybe you're the kind of person that if you get stressed or anxious, you get less hungry. But whatever that is, one really good thing to do would be to start taking note of what is going on and what you're feeling. Whether that's going to be in Seismic on the daily logs, you could add a little note about what was going on, what you were feeling, maybe do a little like 1 to 10 hunger dial, which we're working on in Seismic to do a hunger 0 to 10 for each day instead of just for the end of the week. So that you can start, plotting across the weeks and the months as like what's going on when you're super, super hungry or what's going on when you're not hungry at all, so that you can anticipate and prepare for it. Maybe you'd eat something different if you knew in this particular type of a situation you're going to be very hungry. Maybe you could switch up the types of foods that you're choosing. Maybe you could eat higher volume. Maybe you notice that when it's hotter outside, so you need to be more well hydrated. The more information you have that's consistently collected over time, the easier it is to make educated decisions about how to combat that or how to be more successful. In terms of feeling hunger in general, if you're trying to lose weight, that's kind of just the name of the game. So your body is definitely going to adapt. It's a learning process at the beginning. If you've never tracked your macros before, you're way hungrier at the beginning than you are later on when it gets a lot easier for you. But part of this process is learning how to manage your hunger and really bring some awareness to where it's coming from and how to combat that. Most of us are not, I would say all of us are not in a situation where we're so hungry that we're going to be ill or we're going to really suffer any physical harm from we're not getting that hungry. So I think that it's important to be able to manage that feeling and train yourself on how to get through that. The reason you can't pick and choose, I think the question was, how come your macros reset every 24 hours and you can't be like, I'll have these macros for 48 hours and then I can stack them up on Friday so that I can have a more indulgent meal. The reason of that is because that affects your ability to, one, understand the data. So if things are inconsistent, it's hard to be able to tell where the changes are coming from. If it's not inconsistent in more of a controlled way, but also it's a slippery slope. Part of this process is not doing just whatever it is that you want to do or eating whatever it is you want to eat, because when you were doing that before you got here, it wasn't giving you the results that you were looking for. So part of it is just having to be disciplined and being committed to something that maybe you don't want to do, because in life, sometimes we have to do things we don't want to do. So nutrition is part of every single part of our life, every single day. It's not like a workout. So there's some days you don't work out, so you don't necessarily think about working out. Nutrition is something you have to think about every single day, multiple times a day, because you eat multiple times a day. I don't want people to, pick and choose. I'm going to go on a Saturday night. We're going to go to a restaurant. I'm going to not eat for 2 days because I'm not hungry, or convince yourself in some situations that you're not hungry so that you can be more indulgent on one particular day. I mean, you can work with your coach to make it work, make certain situations work, or to figure out how you can indulge in something you really want to indulge in. But I would never want that to turn into a habit or a negative association to have to refrain from eating in order to eat something later, and to develop any weird associations that way. So that's my take on that. I would love to be able to just, get all the results I want, eating whenever I wanted, whatever I wanted. But sometimes most often it doesn't work exactly like that. And it's just easy to work in a 24-hour time frame because you go to sleep and you wake up. So, I mean, I know there's some shift workers here, so we actually do adapt things for those people. So we'll use maybe a 48-hour time frame for a certain set of macros, 24-hour time frame for a different set of macros. But for most people, you're going to sleep and then you're waking up at similar times every single day. So having that reset every single day is just a great way to keep things consistent, a great way to know what it is that you're eating every day, and way to track changes. The next question is, how do you eat clean with higher carbs and protein? So my first statement with this is it depends on what you define as clean. So some people take this in one direction versus another direction. It depends on what you define as being clean eating. Some people think that just paleo is clean eating, where bacon would be considered paleo. So do you think that that's clean? Or it depends on where your limitations are and where you feel comfortable. So if oats and potatoes and rice are off limits, which are going to be higher carb and lower fat, it's going to be harder for you to meet your numbers, but it's not going to be impossible. I would also let your coach know, it's really hard for me to hit this carb number because I only eat vegetables, or I won't eat oats, protein, potatoes, or rice. Let your coach in on that information so they can maybe make some adjustments to make things easier for you to be consistent. If you are doing high intensity exercise, I would suggest maybe adding some oats, some rice, or some potatoes, sweet potatoes, regular potatoes into your diet. It can help improve your performance. So some other vegetables that are going to be higher carbs would be radishes or carrots. You're also going to have fruit. If fruit is considered clean or not clean, I mean, I've heard every single variation of this conversation. So I've heard, pineapple and bananas and mangoes because they're the higher carb fruits or higher glycemic fruits. They're not necessarily considered as clean as strawberries or berries or blackberries. But I definitely don't want to get into that rabbit hole. I do not believe in classifying foods as being better or worse than another. I think that we always want to strive towards eating things that are high in micronutrients, that come from natural sources, that are not processed, but I'm not going to judge anybody for their choices, and I hope that helps. I would also, to eat clean with higher protein, where are your protein sources coming from? There are lots of protein sources that would be considered clean by almost anybody that do not also come with a lot of fat. So most of the times it's hard to keep the fat low with also keeping the protein high. So whether that's turkey, chicken, calamari, or whitefish, or shrimp, or all sorts of different variations of seafood, eggs without the yolk. There's lots of different protein options that you can pull from that come with very little fat. So I would also take an assessment of being, am I having a lot of olive oil and a lot of avocado and a lot of bacon and a lot of high fat, low volume food because that's my preference? Or is it something that I need to make this meal taste great? So just do a little audit of what it is that's holding you back, and I would definitely open that conversation up to your coach. Let them help you. They've dealt with that before. We also have these conversations within our staff Facebook group where we work all together as a team to compile all of our experience to help you work through whatever it is. So I would definitely open up your coach and talk about those struggles to meet those numbers. And that is going to be your best bet. Next question is aligning your nutrition with your training. So most of these questions in nutrition are going to be completely individual. It depends on who you are. It depends on what your goals are. But one thing that I would for sure say is that the more information you have, the better. And you also don't want things to get too crazy complicated, having like 5 different sets of macros depending on what it is that you're doing. But the more information, the better means have a big picture idea of what's going on in your training. Are you focusing on one particular thing for the next couple months? Or is the volume going up and then you're going to have a deload? In order to have preparations far in advance, you can be able to adjust your nutrition for that kind of thing. I'm getting a text message, but I want to make sure oh, never mind. It was from one of our staff, so I wanted to make sure like everything's going fine and you guys can hear me. So the more information that you have is the better. So what does the next 3 months of training look like? Are you going to be doing super, super high endurance days? Are you going to be super high, low volume, heavier days? And you can work with your coach to assess this data in Seismic. We have this amazing software that we use that can basically store all of this information in the notes and in the macronutrient numbers and also in your check-ins with your coach. So you can assess the changes to your nutrition, also aligning them with the information that we have for your training to see what's making you perform really well, what's giving you lots of high energy, and see what changes are changing what, making what type of effect. I would definitely be very, very clear with conviction what it is that your goals are and set the expectations appropriately. So you could say your goal is to win the national championships as a weightlifter, but then realizing the kind of nutrition that it takes to achieve that. So one particular example might be Jessica Lucero, who's the best 58 kilogram weightlifter in American history. Her nutrition is dialed in at probably for 75% of the year. There's 25% of the year where she goes on vacation, she's far out from a meet, she just went to Costa Rica for a week, but she can't come back from Costa Rica 65 kilos. So, are you going to be willing to do what it takes with your nutrition to align with where you're at in your training cycle? So sometimes that might mean eating a lot less because you're really close to a meet, or it might mean eating a lot more and sacrificing some body composition to get some gains in strength. It's almost impossible to gain weight without gaining some level of body fat as well. So it really just depends on what your goals are, and as well as how your training is changing and how often it is that your training is changing. So are you really committed to one particular training program, or are you floating in and out of different training programs and it's changing all the time? Because without some level of consistency, we always come back to consistency because that's the only way we're going to be able to track changes. So it's like a science experiment. If you don't control as many variables as possible, it's impossible to draw causation anywhere. So we want to keep things as consistent as possible while also having as much information as possible about how you're feeling, how you're recovering, how you're performing in those workouts to make an adjustment and see how that then affects those other factors. So hope that answers that. I do work with a number of elite level athletes that their nutrition is different for each and every single one of them. So it's really hard to give a solid answer. The principles are all generally the same in terms of they're all eating, the CrossFit athletes are eating higher carbohydrates. Any endurance athlete is going to be eating higher in fat, but across most of the board, it's really different. Depends on their lifestyle and what they're willing to do in order to make this fit their life. The next question is games athletes and consistency. How many of these games athletes are 100% on their macros 100% of the time? I would go as far as to say none of them. 0% of them are 100% on their nutrition 100% of the time, but it fluctuates only in specific times of the year. So specifically the athletes that I work with, we know what times of the year are going to be inconsistent. So for now, like let's use now as an example. So the CrossFit Games just ended. There's a period of time after the CrossFit Games where most people are not tracking, or they're loosely tracking and they're using estimations in order to just not go too far off the rails if they don't have a good handle on intuitive eating just yet. But we know that just after the CrossFit Games, you're the furthest away from the next season, and the CrossFit Games aren't going to move. So that's the one difference between maybe, you know, someone who's just an athlete in the gym versus someone in the CrossFit Games. Their goal doesn't move. You can't be like, oh, I'm going to move the deadline for when I'm going to, you know, dial in my nutrition, because that date doesn't change. It's always going to be when the CrossFit Games is. So for sure, their nutrition is more important in specific times of the year than it is in others. But it is a consistency over time. So you can't just dial in your nutrition 6 weeks out from the CrossFit Games and expect to see the results of somebody that's been dialed in for 8 months of the year. It's just not, it's not the same. Your body hasn't adapted the same. It's not getting used to the nutrients that you're putting in your body, and it's not having that ability to recover the same way. So you can't, there's no like shortcut to this. This time of year is a great example because they're getting back into the swing of things. Training is ramping back up. They haven't been training as much over the past few weeks, but it also is holiday time. So Thanksgiving is coming up, Halloween is coming up, Christmas or Hanukkah or whatever it is that you celebrate. This is that time of the year. It's also further away from the CrossFit Games than, you know, come January. The Open's coming in March, gets a lot quicker at that time of the year. But we know which times are there going to be less consistent. So then that puts a heavier weight on the other times that you decide to be inconsistent. So if you know you're not going to be super strict on your macros during Thanksgiving, you know that Christmas is going to be where you're going to want to indulge in a slice of pie, or you're going to want to not look at your MyFitnessPal, whatever it is that you've decided. Then now the other days that you decide to, you know, just randomly go drinking with your friends on the weekend, or just for a Tuesday night sake, go eat tacos at a different restaurant and not track it. That's going to be carry a lot more weight because it's another day that's taking away from the overall picture and the overall progress that you're aiming to make. So for some people, like a games athlete, that is potentially a really big deal. For me, it's not as big of a deal. For me, if I just decide on a Tuesday night that it's more important to me to, you know, be a little more lax and estimate a little bit more, or, you know, track up until dinner and make sure that I have ample carbs and fats left and have some tacos with my friends, then that's probably what I'm gonna do. But that's the stage that I'm at in my nutrition. If I right now was trying to lose 10 pounds, or if I had a specific date or a goal like the CrossFit Games athletes are aiming for, I would definitely be more strict. I've been in maintenance mode for over a year, and I've been tracking my macros for almost 11 years. So I think that it depends on where you are. But part of the question was, you know, is it a big deal to once a month not track your macros and to just like have a cheat meal? I will say that none of these athletes that I'm working with have cheat meals. There probably are CrossFit Games athletes that are having cheat meals. I don't know them personally. I can tell you from experience, the ones that I'm working with don't have like blatant cheat meals where they're specifically going to a restaurant to overindulge. That's definitely not happening. Most of them are very focused on eating high volume, micronutrient dense food items and focusing on recovering and timing their meals around their workouts. I don't think I've worked with a single one that's specifically going during the season. Maybe right after the CrossFit Games, they're being a little bit more slack, but none of them are completely overindulging in that capacity. But is it that big of a deal? It really goes back to depending on what your goals are. So if with conviction, you can say that it's very important to you to achieve the body that you're looking for, the weight that you're looking for, the performance that you're looking for, the relationship with food that you're looking for, and then go back to maintenance or whatever it is that you're after, if you know that that's important to you, then it might be that big of a deal to have a complete cheat meal every single month. It might makes progress slower for you. That doesn't mean that progress is going to be non-existent, but I would assess with you what it is that you're trying to achieve by taking that cheat meal. I mean, the name cheat in itself is saying that you're doing something wrong per se, and I don't like to talk like that. I would rather call something a free meal. Maybe it means free of your app or free of tracking your macros, but I would work with your coach on what it is that you're trying to achieve in that scenario. What's the goal? Why are we taking that meal? Is it just because you want some freedom from tracking your macros? Because you can achieve that without entirely overindulging and without, blowing your macros or without having a complete binge. It's not going to be the end of the world, but doing that every once in a while, it could fuel some negative behaviors that you don't necessarily want to have. So I would just really take a good look at like what is it that I'm trying to do. If you really just want to like go to town on a pint of Ben & Jerry's and that's like what it is that you're after, doing that once a month and accepting that you've decided that. So that therefore means that your progress is going to be slower if you're trying to lose weight. It's also, if you're trying to gain weight without gaining a lot of body fat, your progress is also going to be slower there, might affect your recovery. But you've accepted that and you're okay with it and you're not going to get frustrated with yourself or get frustrated with your coach, then I would do it. Sure, go for it. If that's, if you can make that acceptance with yourself. If you know that you're going to do it and you're going to feel awful the next day, you're going to be guilty, you're going to have anxiety, you're going to, you're going to feel awful about yourself afterwards, I would probably try and find some other more productive solutions. So working with your coach on having a free meal, they can give you how many macros to have before that meal. They can help you choose a range of options or food items to stay away from, or it depends on who you are and what's going to work for you. So I think it can be an amazing practice. Like there is so many benefits to taking a free meal, to taking a planned diet break, to taking a break from tracking your macros. There's so many amazing things that can come from that. It can reinvigorate your motivation to even do this program. It can make you excited to be tracking again. It can help you learn some skills in intuitive eating. It can help you realize, I'm confident and I'm capable and I can do this without tracking my macros. And that's totally cool. And doing that with the awareness and moderation and without just like completely going back to these old habits that you've worked really hard to try and change, that can be amazingly productive. But I would definitely think about why, think about what it is that you're trying to achieve, and go from there. The next question and the last question. So at this point, if you guys have any other questions, post them to the comments and I can answer those quickly. But the last question is going to be, if my favorite macro is fat, would you adjust the macros, add fat, take away from carbohydrates? Why would you do that? Like most of our things in nutrition, it depends on who you are. It also depends on what your goals are. So if your goal is to win the CrossFit Games and this is going to take away from your performance, I would probably not do it. If you're not going to be compliant regardless and you're going to eat more fat, then I probably would. I would up the fat and I would lower the carbohydrates to keep calories at a certain amount just to have you be compliant, because consistency is the base. Consistency and compliance is the most important. So I would do things like tracking how your body responds, so upping the fat and lowering the carbohydrates, and tracking the mood, the energy, the stress, the hunger, the sleep, your body weight, your body composition. It depends on what your goals are, right? So if your goal is to be as lean as possible, to win the CrossFit Games, to do whatever it is that your goal is specifically, if raising your fat and lowering your carbohydrates is taking you away from that goal, so maybe it's changing your body composition for in a different direction than where you want to go, which it can happen for some people. Some people respond to fat differently. Then I would probably have a conversation about how important is that goal to you and how important is increasing the fat in your diet. It really depends. So the number one goal is always going to be consistency and compliance. So if raising your fat and lowering your carbohydrate intake is going to help you achieve that, I would definitely do that to get some level of compliance. And then we can make smaller changes to bring it down after that and make it so that you don't really feel it as much. But it just really depends. Maybe we increase your fat and we lower your carbohydrates and you start tanking in the gym. So I always go to, it's worth it to try. It's worth it to tell your coach that this is something you want to try. And I think that all the coaches would be tell you how they feel about it, tell you what their opinion is, but support anything that is that you want to try. And at least we have this amazing software and this amazing team that's supportive of you and your goals that you can test things like that. So week to week, you can see how this is changing things for you, and you can make an educated decision as to whether that is something that you want to do or something that works for you. And you can have actual information to back that decision up instead of just saying, I love fat, I want to eat more avocado, so I'm going to ask for my fat macros to be increased. But if you really do love avocado and you want to eat more avocado, then let's do that too. I hope that this was useful for you guys and I answered some of your questions. If you have any more, leave them in the comments and tag me, and I'll definitely answer anything that comes up. Next week is going to be, I believe it is Ashley and Mel who are going to be on Facebook Live next week. We're actually having our Working Against Gravity staff retreat next week, so they'll be together in person doing this Facebook Live. And I'm super excited for you guys to see that. And yeah, comment. Let me know if you have any questions. And next time I come on here, maybe I'll have something I'm really excited about sharing with you guys.